Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Tune It Up. I'm Redspark. If you haven't seen the first part of this mini-series, please view it now. We will be building on a scene that we created in the first tutorial. In this video, we will investigate various ways of creating an outline in Poser. Since there are several ways to create an outline in Poser, I have chosen a set of criteria for what we're looking for. First of all, the option must not involve post work because it needs to be easy to use for animation. So to cut down on the number of methods we're looking at, I've already removed those. The outline must be relatively smooth and pleasing to look at. It should have controls over where it is applied and its appearance. And finally, kind of obvious, but it must work reliably. So with that in mind, let's get started. Now, in our first tutorial, we covered creating a Toon node to make that duotone or two-tone skin shader. And in doing so, I set the line width to 0. Let's go back and monkey around with the Toon node and see what features it offers. As you can see, I've already loaded the scene inside of Poser that we had finished up with in the last video. Under the material room, select the skin material for chip or whatever figure you're using and look at the Toon node. We have line width as an option. Let's just set that to 1. And you notice that this thick outline with some heavy shading happens, both in the preview window and in the materials preview. That's because of the original algorithm. Let's switch that to improved, and improved at least fixes the materials preview. It doesn't fix the preview window. It's preview, obviously. However, that means that this option is only available in Firefly. It does not work inside of the preview renderer. So let's go under Pose and render this out to see what it looks like. Okay. It's not thick enough to go all the way around, but it's not too bad right off the bat. Let's go in and try again with a heavier setting. Let's go with line 2. Well, now I don't like that. Totally blackened out the preview window, so it'll become difficult to see what your Toon looks like in preview. It was bad enough with that heavy shading, but now it's completely blotted out, so you can't obviously use the line width. You'd have to apply it last in your settings. But let's go on and see what happens. Okay. Oh, all right. So we see here that there's a lot of breaking up of the thickness of the line, and it doesn't look right. There's something wrong with that, with this. Now, your figure may not experience this, but I suspect it does. Let's go back and check a much heavier setting and see what that looks like. Now, a proper algorithm shouldn't matter how thick the line is. It should be good at any setting, and this just isn't. Poor Chip looks like he's been in a bar fight. He's got 2 black eyes and a big puffy mouth there, and he looks awful. So, this obviously is not pleasing to look at by any means, even though you have control over its appearance and where it's applied, because it's within the Toon node, so it's material based. It's just not nice at all. So let's get rid of that. Let's go back and take that completely off. That's obviously not a good option to use. And in fact, if you look at the setup here, the macros that are on the side, there's an option to set up the Toon renderer. And if you're inside a material and use that, it will transfer the diffuse, color, and so on into the Toon node and alternate diffusion. But when it sets up the Toon node, it sets the line width to 0. And then it turns on the Toon outline in the Firefly render options. So let's try that next instead of using the line width and see what that's like. So under the render settings, under Firefly tab, render over, we have Toon outline. Now I'm going to set that to a thin pen because I really want to start out on a small outline setting to see what it's like first. Let's choose save. And this is again a Firefly setting. It's not something that will show up in the preview render, so you don't see anything, no outline at all in the preview, which not that great. You'd actually have to render to see it, which kind of can be annoying because Firefly could be slow, is much slower than the preview. But let's render it and see what it's like. So this is a post render effect. So you'll see your image completely render and then the outline will be applied afterwards. Now that's not too bad. That's not too bad. It's very thin, but it's not too bad. You may not actually see it in the video because it's so thin right at the moment. So let me jack it up. Render settings, go in, change the thickness. So we'll go up to a medium pen. And save and re-render. So we see chip rendering and then the outline is applied. Now I'm seeing something, you may not see it because the video compression might filter it out, or it might just look like it's some kind of compression artifact, but there's tiny spots all over Chip's face. I'm going to bump up this option to thick marker, which is the heaviest outline setting, and render it so that it becomes a little bit more obvious what's going on. Boom. Chip has measles. Wow, I don't think that was the effect I was going for, or wanting. So we see that the outline is over just about everything, and on top of that, it's not quite reliably producing the outline. It looks like somehow it's picking up on something to do with the geometry of Chip that it's not liking. Now I know I've seen this work with other figures without this, and it, I suppose, could be because of the distance of the camera, or maybe it's because of the geometry of the figure. But no amount of smoothing or subdividing of Chip ever got rid of these spots. And you have no control over where this is applied. It's applied everywhere. So we see it going around one of his eye reflex. We see it going around his eye socket. The mouth, if the spots weren't there, would look nice. And the outline around the edge actually looks nice, but it doesn't look like it's an actually reliable option, and it certainly doesn't look good because of the spots. If the spots were gone, it may not be too bad, but you don't have control over its appearance as much as I'd like it to be. You can't change the outline's color, you can't change where it's applied to. So I don't think this is a viable option either. So let's go in, and I'm just going to revert this back to what it was. So I get rid of all those options. And let's check out our next possibility. And that's the new option of geometric outlines with Poser 2014. If you go down below the preview window, there is a comic style option here. If you right click on it, it brings up the comic book preview options. There's an option for geometric edge lines. If you turn that on, bam, it brings on an outline. Now, for an organic style creature like Chip, there's an option called Weld that's here. That's more useful for outlining straight edges rather than organics. If you take it off, it will make the outline a little bit better. So right away we see that the outline is much better in appearance, although its thickness right now is a little heavy. We have the options to change those. Now we do see outlining happening just like in some of the others in places that we don't want. So there's some around the eyebrows, some around the eyelashes, and there's a problematic issue with the mouth as well. We can see that the shadow of the upper lip is up there, but the line for the mouth is farther below. So there's an issue there. Let's see what we can do to fix those. Inside the material room, we can go in here, and there's two options: geometric edge and geometric edge color. Now, geometric edge gives a value. Now, that's the thickness of the line. So if we go to eyelashes and set that to 0, and we go to eyebrows and set that to 0, that gets rid of that completely. And if we go to the skin and decrease this to, let's say, 2.5, instead, it goes down in size. So if we want to dial it down further to maybe 0.2 or 0.002, sorry, then, that's not too bad. If I want to change the color of it to, say, instead of it being a black outline, change it to being something that's a darker shade of the skin tone, then you can just select that and then decrease the shading of the outline. And that gives you, if we go all the way back, it's not black, but it is a darker form of that. We could lighten that up further to make a tone-on-tone kind of outline. So that automatically is already much better in appearance. So let's see what we can do about the mouth. What this option is doing, it's actually creating a replica of Chip and expanding it out and inverting the normals so that when we remove the back-facing polygons from the render, all that shows up is the edges of that geometry, which forms an outline. However, when you get areas like this, where geometry kind of crisscrosses each other, the line may be in an unpredictable spot, a spot that you don't want. So if that's the case, you can go in, I'll select Chip's head, I'm going to go to his mouth. You may be able to go in and do this. I'm just going to open his mouth a little bit, and that'll shift the line up to where it should be. Now, if I open it too much, it'll look like he has got his mouth open. But there's a particular point where it still looks like he's got his mouth closed, but that's his mouth line. Now, if I were building a new figure instead of using Chip, or if I were to maybe create a morph for Chip so that the outline worked better, I would morph his lips so that his upper lip and his lower lip were parted from each other, but uniformly flat, or uniformly distanced from each other, and that there's no geometry that is crisscrossing into itself. So in this case, what's happening is his upper lip is actually sitting so close to his lower lip that it curves down and into the lower lip, and the lower lip is curving up into the upper lip. And in 3D, that looks fine. It looks like they're sitting on top of each other. There's no biggie. But when the geometry gets scaled up to create the outline effect, that crisscross interferes with what's going on. And so if I were to morph that, I would probably flatten out his lips and separate them slightly. If I were building a new figure, I would make sure that there was no crisscrossing of the geometry involved at all, and that would help with that and help to keep those lips slightly parted from each other, would allow the geometry space to create the outline. Okay, so with that in mind, those options are all curable, but there is one option, at least with Chip, that isn't. We notice here, if I turn on outline, go back to the outline settings and toggle off the geometry edge, look here at the corner of his eye. There's a bit of outline that is showing up and disappearing. Let me move in closer to Chip's corner of Chip's eye. You can actually see the outline here. And that is due to something to do with his geometry. If you actually hid Chip's eye and eye reflection, you would see that he has actually no eye socket. His eye opens directly back into the inside of his skull. And what's happening is that the edge of that geometry is getting picked up here. What you could do is maybe create a morph to shove that down and away, but what probably would be better is that you use a figure that has a closed-in geometry for the socket so that that doesn't show up. There is no edge to be detected in there. Let's review, though, the pros and cons of each of the options. So far, we looked at the Toon node, which frankly was completely worthless for an outline. Don't ever consider it. We looked at the Toon outline in the Firefly render options. That works, but you don't have much control over it. And it's not always reliable with every model. As we saw with Chip, it gave him measles. Then we have the final one, which is a new outline option inside of Poser 2014. You have complete control over the outline's color, the thickness based on material. Now, there's a few gotchas, but with a few well-chosen morphs, you can actually correct those issues. However, there is not as much control as perhaps you'd like to have. If you go under Materials and look again, you notice there's no input into the geometry edging. That means there's no ability to control what happens to the line thickness around the geometry based on UVs, for instance. Perhaps you're going for a calligraphy style pen appearance, and you could adjust the line thickness, or you'd have to adjust the line thickness in certain areas. However, you can't do that with this. It's uniform right now. Now, maybe Smith Micro will open that up with some extra options. However, in the next video, I'll show you how to overcome some of those limitations. However, there is a large setup, and it's more meant for somebody who really understands the ins and outs of Poser to get it to work. However, once you get it working, you can save it to the Poser library as if it were a set of clothing and reload it whenever you need it. I hope you found this video useful, and I hope to see you in the next.